I talked about C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and their time in World War One and the impact that the war had on them and their writing in my last video. In this one, I wanted to talk more about C.S. Lewis and his time in Oxford. He arrived as a student at Oxford and almost immediately was sent into training for the war and then deployed to the front. So he didn't see a whole lot of Oxford initially, but when he was away at the war, he thought about it and it anchored him in memories of the better aspects of humanity. And he wrote a poem while he was away at war about Oxford. And I'll read a few lines from it. It goes, "We are not wholly brute. To us remains a clean, sweet city, lulled by ancient streams, a place of visions and of loosening chains, a refuge of the elect, a tower of dreams. She was not built out of common stone, but out of all men's yearning and prayer, that she might live, eternally our own, the city's stronghold barred against despair." The war had a very specific impact on Jack, though. C.S. Lewis was known as Jack, in that it gave him one of the two women who he lived with in his adult life. While he was training in Oxford for the war, he shared a room with a guy named Patty Moore, and they made a pact together that if either one of them didn't return from the war, the other would take care of their parent, their surviving parent. And Jack met Patty's recently divorced mother during this time, Jane, and his younger sister, Maureen. Jack returned from the war. Patty did not. When he returned, he graduated top of his class in 1922 with what Oxford calls a double first, and was believed to be a strong candidate for a 7-year fellowship at All Souls College, but he didn't apply for it because it would have meant that he couldn't live with Jane and Maureen, in keeping with his promise to Patty. Now, if that sounds like quite a concession to make for a pact made 5 years earlier to a guy he just shared a room with for a handful of weeks, well, it was actually more than that, because by this time he was having an affair with Jane, Patty's mom. She's one of the two women I mentioned that he lived with in his adult life. He was 19 when he returned from the war. She was about 27 years older, 46 at that time. The relationship ended around the time he reconverted to Christianity after the Addison's Walk discussion with Tolkien in 1931 that I talked about in the last video. He ended the relationship around that time. He was 32 and she was almost 60, though they continued living together. They actually bought a house together the year before. The house still stands. It looks similar to what it looked like when he lived there, though I believe the garden's been upgraded a bit. Some of the land that he owned has been donated to a nature reserve behind the house. The house is in Headington. It's a suburb east of Oxford. He would take the bus or walk from his house to his office at Magdalen College. It's about an hour walk through a trail and into the Fellows Garden down Addison's Walk. This is the Kilns. You can sign up for a guided tour to see it. It's maintained by Oxford graduate students. Now, while he was living here around the time the Second World War started, this is just after he finished and published his book Out of the Silent Planet, he had a dream about lions, and that inspired a character, Aslan the lion, which appears in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the other Narnia books. It was around this time that they hosted some schoolgirls who were evacuated from London during the Blitz, and so the characters of evacuated school kids also became a big part of the Narnia books as well, of course. This is his upstairs study where he wrote, next door to his bedroom. And this is the view from his desk in his study, out the window and onto the garden. His friend Tolkien wasn't a big fan of the Narnia stories because they mixed mythologies and Tolkien believed borrowed inaccurately from them, which led to a separation of the two men. It's said that this doorway in St. Mary's Passage in front of Radcliffe Camera in downtown Oxford inspired the Narnia stories as well. It's certainly mythologically inspired, and he walked past it often. Jack was popular in the U.S. By the end of the Second World War, so much so that while the UK had extended rationing in the years after the war, American fans sent him food. Plum pudding and hams and butter came in the mail. There were other Americans in the tour that I did of the Kilns, which, I thought for a minor tourist destination outside of London and even really outside of downtown Oxford seemed a little bit unusual. And I asked the tour guide about it, and she said that almost all the visitors to his house are American. He is very famous in the US and for whatever reason, apparently much less popular in the UK. Well, that's the one woman in his life. In 1952, he met the other major woman, an American writer, Joy Davidson, and she started visiting and staying with him at the Kilns, and they were married in 1956. But shortly after their marriage, they learned that she had an incurable cancer, an event that shook Jack's faith. I mean, now 20-year-old faith, 20 years since he really recommitted to Christianity. She died in 1960, and he died in 1963. I talked about C.S. Lewis and his friendship and collaboration with J.R.R. Tolkien in the last video. I'm going to stay on the theme of World War I and the impact that it had on writers and artists and families. And for that, I'm going to head to a small village in the Cotswolds for the next video. See you then.